I think it's always difficult for a beautiful woman to be respected for her intelligence and to be treated as an intelligent, professional, competent equal. Some of the instances in which I've observed, and especially broadcast TV, because they're on TV in front of an audience. I know when I was going to journalism school, the local female anchor at certain times was told she needed to cut her hair. I'm not aware that any of the male reporters or anchors on that TV newscast got those same requirements. Her wardrobe was consistently checked off and checked on and checked into to make sure she was getting across the appropriate image. In terms of women being objectified, it happens all the time. I mean, if you will look at any news show, morning shows where it's a little more casual, the women are on high stools so that when they're sitting there with dresses, they're often crossing their legs, or you're getting a big long leg shot. We don't notice it quite so much with men, but it's a nice way to get women up where they can be ogled and seen.
One thing I see is, and surveys have shown this kind of what they call hypersexualization, even sometimes, in cartoons, when it's not actual, footage of people. Frequently, when it'll be a woman with a short skirt, high heels, if either fictionalized in the media or non-fictionalized. This is what bothers me a lot. And in news broadcasts, particularly, on one network, which I won't say what it is, it just seems that a lot of the women are very, very blonde. There's a lot of, kind of tight sweaters, tight shirts. And you look at men and it's a totally different story for men. You would never, of course, see a man wearing, anything tight of a broadcaster. Yeah, I think that there are men that maybe, color their hair, but, men are not kind of pressured to have, with super blonde hair, or making sure you have to, quote unquote, look very, very good.
One of the more infamous examples is the famous promo for Paula Zahn, who was being announced as a new anchor for CNN back in 2001. The famous zipper promo that actually labeled her as, quote, a little bit sexy, and you heard the sound of a zipper either going up or going down, most likely going down, since she was being identified as sexy. There was a great hue and cry of the objectification that was going on then, and that spot was pulled, but it didn't stop the objectification.
Where can you find a morning news anchor who's provocative, super smart, oh yeah, and just a little sexy? CNN. Yeah, CNN. Paula Zahn hosts American Morning starting Monday, 7 Eastern. That's right, on CNN.
TV news reporter, and especially when I was a young anchor, I now realize that I very naively subjected myself into the sexist objectification of women by either accepting or allowing others to tell me that I should wear like miniskirts or sit in positions where the camera will show off my legs, or suggest that I dress, somewhat more sexy, something that of course was never requested from my male partners. So at the time, of course, I wasn't aware of how much this kind of things perpetuate the objectification of women. Now I know, and with the information and the experience that I have now, I think I wouldn't do it unless, and this unless is, I think it's very important, because unless I willfully and in full agency want to do it because it's my decision and nobody else's, then I think it's totally not only acceptable, but you're right to do it. But not because it's some sort of norm, social patriarchal norm that you have to comply with to like fit in.
I'm very interested in fashion media and issues of representation in the media, and I always noticed that women like me were not represented accurately. And then I noticed that women who are like me but from other cultural groups, like other people who are immigrants or people who are interested in politics or women who are people of color, I noticed that the media that I read, like fashion magazines and films and the news that I saw, a lot of it was a very stereotypical way of looking at women. So if there was an Indian woman, she would be very conservative or religious. Or if there was a woman from another group, people would have some very fixed ideas about how that woman would be. And I saw that and I thought that it wasn't right. So especially with social media and things, I see women who are like me, but they're still a very westernized version of me, I guess. People with perfect bodies, people with straight hair, people who are Indian but with fairer skin. And so when I saw that, I thought that there should be more women like me in the media who look like everyday relatable people. So for the student fashion magazine thread, I ran this blog in which I did weekly interviews and photo shoots with students in Ohio University. So I always tried to do a photo shoot with somebody who I thought was not represented in the traditional print fashion media. So I did a photo shoot with a friend from Pakistan in which she taught us how to wear a hijab in a stylish way. I did a photo shoot with a friend who had different visual abilities about how she wears color in the summer. And every time I did a photo shoot, I tried to do a story that they could relate to. So I don't think I ever went to them with an idea. I would ask them, what kind of relationship do you have with your appearance? Because all these women came from groups that were not represented very often in the media. And they all had a different relationship with their body, with their looks. So I went to them and say, what are you interested in? So a friend of mine who was of mixed race origins said she had a love-hate relationship with her hair. And so we did a photo shoot on that. And then I always sort of let them tell their story. So while as a journalist, it's very common for us to go approach a source with preconditioned notions about what kind of information we want from them and what kind of story we want to tell with this article. But I sort of went to them, and I think more journalists should do that, where they sort of let the subjects sort of participate in a creative way in the story. So there's a little bit of you, there's a little bit of them, so there's collaboration. I think for accurate representation, you have to give control to the people whose story you are telling, so that they can tell us the things that they want to say without us putting words into their mouth. I think even with fashion and beauty media, there's this notion that it's very trivial, that it doesn't mean a lot or it's not important. But when it comes to people who come from groups that are not seen very often, they all have certain notions about themselves that come from the negative perspectives in which the media has portrayed them. But as they've grown and as they've evolved, as they've sort of learned to love themselves, they've all embraced things about their own ethnicity, me, myself included. Their ethnicity, their culture, and when you talk to them, when you do photo shoots with them, when you get to know them as friends, you learn these things from them. And that's, I think, something that the media should write more about, which is that them telling their own stories.
Kia ora tātou. Ko San Rafael te mauna, ko San Marcos te awa, ko Air New Zealand te waka, no te Texas aho, ko Katpaze toko inawa. Tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. Hi. My name is Kat Paze, and I'm a fat studies scholar and fat activist working in New Zealand. I've been here for 12 years, and one of the things I haven't quite gotten used to is how they represent fat people in the media. Now, it isn't much different from how fat people are represented around the world in the media. Usually, when fat people are included in stories, it's as what Dr. Charlotte Cooper calls a headless fatty. So that's a fat person without a head, just simply the waist down. It adds to the objectification of fat people and the thinking of us as less than human. Now, I was represented in a different way back in 2012 when I was doing quite a lot of media around the very first Fat Studies conference ever to be held in New Zealand. And in fact, one of the papers in New Zealand published an editorial cartoon of myself alongside an op-ed basically telling me that I needed to shut my big fat mouth and quit talking about fat people deserving the same rights as non-fat people.
This profile of the aspirational women we all want to be, and which excludes all other kinds of women, or diversity of women by the color of their skin or their shape or their size. And although there are some people that try to do something about it and include all of this, we're still ages away from what it should be. And I see this as a problem that it's the same here or in Peru or anywhere else where there's a capitalism or a capitalist society and democracy. And I think that's very harmful, especially for young women that are growing up and trying to build their identities, and they feel either ashamed of themselves or worth less than other women because they don't fit that model. And I believe all these people that portray women that way either are not aware of the damage that they're causing to young women or don't care.
There's this sense of making us look very exotic that happens in America, and I'm not sure where exactly that comes from, but sort of the other woman, and then the kind of bodies that we have, the kind of skin that we have, the kind of hair that we have is sort of fixated upon. I think a lot of fixation in general when it comes to women happens on appearance and how they look. And then I see this a lot in fashion that we do today, is that a lot of brands will hire models that they say come from diverse backgrounds, but these are all models who still fit into Eurocentric ideals of beauty. So they'll hire an African American model with fair skin, or they'll hire an Indian model who has the kind of body type that a European model would have. So I think what they're looking for is still diversity that fits into their definition of what is attractive and what would sell their clothes. And I think that's something that also happens with Indian women in general, is that our looks are the things that people fixate upon, and then only the Indian women who fit into a Western idea of beautiful are the ones who are celebrated even in Western culture.
If you look at the infancy of media, if we go back to the early 1900s, print media, as well as the early days of film and television, you see stereotypes. In fact, for Black women, that's pretty much all it was. Images that were very one-dimensional and didn't really show the depth of who they were as individuals, as people, as, creative and important parts of a larger community. So absolutely, I think the challenge sometimes is distancing ourselves from those stereotypes, but so much of those ideas inform the way that people continue to think, which is why they're still in circulation, even though they're as problematic as they have been and continue to be.
I think that because women generally were seen as the weaker or lesser than sex, so it's so very easy to portray us in stereotypical manners. If you think about recently, or more recently, how Serena Williams was portrayed in the media with the angry Black woman stereotype, and then that disgusting cartoon that was passed around about her, and other instances as well. If women are not serving a purpose, I think that it's very easy for them to be portrayed negatively.
Mark's cartoon wasn't racist, it wasn't sexist, it was about mocking a petulant meltdown by a tennis champion.
On the one hand, you have a woman like Caster Semenya, who was an Olympian, gold medal receiving athlete, And the way the American media portrayed her was deplorable. And so a lot of people in South Africa were behind her. But if you look at the way that South African media treats women, especially the so-called slay queens or women who are beautiful, it's a disgusting way, because it's as if there are these rules that we have to abide by, and once we don't abide by those rules, then we are up for slaughter. So it's just this interesting dynamic between how Americans portray African women and then how African men portray African women as well.
I don't think we've progressed a whole lot. I think we've become more sophisticated at doing the same thing. So great example is there's a guy by the name of Lawrence Reddick. He's a scholar, comes up with this list of stereotypes. And black women are, either the mammy type, or they're the sapphire, or there's some other stereotype on their sexuality. And so what I've seen over time in terms of media is that, back in the day, let's say when Hattie McDaniel won an Oscar for Gone with the Wind, it's the mammy. That was her name in the film, Gone with the Wind. So maybe in 2019, you don't have a film where a woman is called the mammy, but you still see the residue of that era. So, The Help quickly comes to mind. And other films will kind of limit the range of expression of black women. So we've become more sophisticated, but the work of limiting the possibility, the range, is still present. So this other example comes to mind. During the 1980s, there was a show called Give Me a Break. Nell Carter was a famous jazz singer. And as we know from our study of media, early on there's the mammy image. The mammy was kind of heavy set, and her whole focus was on taking care of white children, typically in a very white space like a plantation. Give Me a Break obviously is not set in the early 1900s like 1920, 1930. This is a show that's based in the 1980s. So the difference here is you have a woman who happens to be heavyset, who happens to be able to sing, jazz singer in real life, and she's been asked by this police chief to come in and help him with his daughters because his wife is deceased. So it's not the exact same setup as Gone with the Wind or films or TV shows from that era, but that residue is still there. You still have this black woman who is largely there to take care of these white children and whose other skill happens to be singing. But it's not 100% the same as Hattie McDaniel, but you still see that connection. And in a lot of ways, when you have black women as co-stars, their job is to help this white character through whatever challenges that they're having. So I think that the sophistication is in the rendering of these types, not in the erasure of the stereotype.
Miss Scarlett, where are you going without your shawl and night air fixing to set in? And how come you didn't ask them gentlemen to stay for supper? You ain't got no more manners than a field hand. After me and Miss Ellen done labored with you. Miss Scarlett, come on in the house. Come on in before you catch your death of dampness.
No, I'm going to wait for Pa to come home from the Wilkses.
Come on in here.
Hi, my name is Ibtihal Mahadeen, and I'm a lecturer in gender and media with a focus on the Middle East. I'm based at the Department of Islamic and Middle Eastern Studies at the University of Edinburgh in the UK. My work focuses on representations of women and female sexuality in Arab media, specifically Jordanian media. And one of the topics that I want to bring to your attention today is representations of female virginity in Jordanian media, which I have found to revolve around certain themes that were quite negative in their portrayal of women. So, for example, in my analysis of representations of so-called honor crimes in Jordanian media and how they get covered, I found what I call the hymen status line, which is basically a line that is used in Jordanian media to verify the innocence or the virginity of victims of so-called honor crimes, in an attempt to garner sympathy for them and to show themselves to be condemning the practice. So in coverage of so-called honor crimes, they alongside details about the crimes themselves, they will also mention, they will have a line that says, and post-mortem examinations found that the victim was a virgin. What this does is two things. First of all, it says indirectly that if the victim hadn't been a virgin, then her killing would have been justified. And second of all, it basically ties the innocence and the validity and the importance of the life of the victim to the status of her hymen.
Right now in my country, for example, there's a journalist, a women journalist, who has reported a congressman for sexually harassing her, and she doesn't want to go public because she's a very humble person, and she doesn't want to deal with the publicity of it. But somebody else did report, she did the official report with her name and everything, but she doesn't want to go out and be in the media. So now you can see how not only some of the media, but also society, like in the social media, they are blaming her for any kind of things, like why did she write him a message at 1 a.m, or if she knew he was married, or if she's 40, how can she say she's harassed by a married man, and things like that portray, like try to put the blame always in the women because they're women. So that is very sad to see, not only how some journalists will do this, but also society in a whole. So I think it's like a double way avenue where the media is constantly feeding these messages of diminishing women, or treating them as sex objects, or as they should have certain, rules or norms for which they should behave by, and that, they don't equally apply to men. And then the public reacts like that too. So I think it's very unfortunate that we're still in a stage where women is always portrayed in these diminishing situations and positions, and there's still a lot to learn for everyone. I think, I think we're still finding out the extent of the damage that the patriarchal society, with its implicit and explicit norms, have done to society at large, including the media, but society at large, and how we all behave towards women differently than towards men.
Part of the problem is that women do not have a lot of buying power in the media. We're not really the owners of industry. And I think that once we turn those tables and actually have partnerships and ownership and percentages in different businesses, that's when we'll be able to start to turn the conversation.
The main thing is education, and which is exactly what we're doing here. I think calling attention to something really helps, because we take these things for granted, especially college students, because they're younger, they were, raised with, there's nothing unusual about this. This happened, I saw this when I was 6 years old, I'm seeing it now. So it becomes the norm. So I think questioning it, asking questions like this, paying attention to surveys and studies. There's a lot more studies done on this now, on representations of women, than there were 10 years ago, and certainly a lot more than there were 20 and 30 years ago. That is an absolute step in the right direction. And another way to kind of remedy it is, we are training, educating people here at Ohio University to get good jobs, to get jobs, managerial jobs. If you have people at the top, let's say woman head CBS News, all right, it's not a cure-all, but having a female in a managerial position, they tend to be more sensitive to images of women. It's just a natural that, will it fix things for good? No. But the more students here train for jobs like this, are educated for jobs like this, are aware of the problems, gradually this will change. It's not going to change in a year or two, but the education, the awareness of this is happening, you know, and we want to start seeing it, learning about it, and discussing it and ways to remedy it.
What we are trying to do as a faculty, and we are led by the example of our director, is to make sure that we are relating to human beings on the human level and not labels, not how you identify, not what you look like, not where you worship, not whether you worship, etc., etc. Journalism is about the story of humanity, period. And there are different people who are doing different things who comprise that humanity. And that has always been the case since humankind has existed. What we're trying to teach our students is that as you go out into the world, there may be situations in which you're covering stories that are different from your experience. That's okay. How can we equip you in terms of your use of language, in terms of how you select images, in terms of how you write your copy, in terms of how you put together your news package, your graphics, all of those things in a way that shows humans as humans.
I think the best part with OU is that there's so much student media. There's Post, there's Backdrop, there's Thread, there's Per Campus, there's a New Political, there's a publication for whatever interest you have. And so I think one of the ways to make a useful contribution to real life media is to start with student media. And what's important is to make our newsrooms more diverse. So if we want more diverse stories to be told with our publications, we need journalists and photographers and designers who come from diverse backgrounds. So I think student organizations themselves can also do things that help them invite more people of color into their teams, people from different sexualities, people who believe in different religions, people who come from different countries. We have such a big international student population, so there are so many stories to tell over there. And I think as students, I think there are things that we should value, and one of those things is diversity. And then we should use whatever platforms we have to talk about things that matter to us. And then, of course, we can talk about things that are just everyday and student life and things like that. But if there are any issues that we are passionate about, any sort of social issues or environmental issues, we should use the platforms we have to discuss those. And if there are classmates we have who we think are not getting the sort of attention that they should get for their stories, or who we think have interesting stories to tell, we should work with them and see if there's something that we can do to bring their stories to the platforms that we have.
It's a mistake when the people think that certain problems are just personal problems. Like if there is a sexual assault or a situation with people that know each other, or they were partners, and many times people feel like this is like just a personal thing between those two people, and they don't realize that all those so-called personal things are part of a bigger problem, that it's a social problem that many people and many women are experiencing in this time of age, and that is part of this structural damage done by patriarchal norms in society. So I think it's a good thing to keep in mind that every problem of this kind, when it's reported by the victim, should be treated as not only a personal problem, but as a social problem that we all as society have to take a stance on, and to try to contribute to make a better society. So, and by taking a stance, I mean that there's no neutral or neutral position in cases like this. Being neutral when there is a victim is just being an accomplice to the perpetrator. And I also think that's something that is very important to keep in mind when we're dealing with these kind of problems.
I think we have to want to end it. I think so many of us, I'm using us loosely, we struggle with clear conversations on discrimination. We're always looking for an out. Well, this happened because, or the reason this was this way, and those ways of trying to explain it do little service to ending it. So I think the first thing is to be authentic and honest in our conversations and to acknowledge that this is real. This isn't something that happened 100 years ago and we're over it. It is something that did happen 100 years ago and we're not over it. So I think that's one of the ways. Included in the curriculum. What does your curriculum look like with regard to this issue? Do you have the voice of Black women in your syllabi, in your course readings? Is that a focal point? And I think it should be more than just if the subject is about Black women. For example, if you are an English professor, if you are in any discipline, are you looking to say, can I get subject area experts that represent this group of people? So that can kind of demystify the idea that you have Black scholars who can speak about whatever the topic is.
I think we need to start writing stories about ourselves. We need to start, we should stop being afraid of our power and understanding that we actually do have that power and we don't need to see men as gatekeepers, even though a lot of times they are. We need to start pushing past that and recreating our own narratives.